This is one of the two deconsecrated west churches of Kilbarchan. This one dates from 1724, but attached to it is part of an older church, which became the Cunningham of Craigenn's Aisle. Here they had a burial site, a crypt, as well as a loft. Habby Simpson, the famous piper of Kilbarchan, is buried here. A poem about him, using what became known as the Habby Standard, is a poetic style of construction which Robert Burns frequently used in his poetry. Also, on one side of the church there are a number of plaques. This is the minister's corner, so a number of the ministers of Kilbarchan Church are commemorated here. The Glen Cairn Aisle in Camors, East Ayrshire, will be part of the original church, and later part of the Collegiate College was built here, the only other part remaining being what has become a dovecot. It contains the Glen Cairn Monument, which is dedicated to the memory of the 7th Earl of Glen Cairn, James, and his wife, Margaret Cunningham. Also present inside are two 14th or 15th century cross slabs. These may commemorate Sir William Cunningham, who in 1413 established the Collegiate College. St Connell's Church is in a remote location. It said there was a leper colony at one time. The monks were also amongst the first to mine coal. The saint himself is said to be buried on the hillside overlooking his church. It dates from the 12th to 13th century. In 1729 a new church was built in what is now Kirkconnell. Excavations were carried out here, many by miners who had been laid off during the miners' strike. A large number of carved stones with Celtic interlace, swords and so on are preserved here and covered over in display area. Kirkconnell is named after a king who was killed in 641 AD. The new church was built in 1777. The churchyard here is famous for a burial site for a number of Robert Burns' maternal relatives, also as a burial site for Suitor Johnny and Tam O'Shanter. The font inside the Kirk ruins is said to be the one that was used to christen Robert the Bruce. The Marks of Bute built an aisle here, but was never used. Abbot Kennedy of Crossregule Abbey preached a famous sermon here against the Reformation. This led to a debate with John Knox at Maybole, with neither being declared the winner. This is the old Lamberton Kirk, very close to the border with England. Queen Margaret Tudor, the sister of Henry VIII, was entertained here in 1503 with horse races and tournaments on Lamberton Moor. She then went with the Commissioners of Scotland to Edinburgh, where she married King James IV of Scotland. The church was dedicated to St Lambert. After it fell into disuse, it became the burial aisle of the Logan family and the Renton family. Bishop Lambert, who was a great supporter of Robert the Bruce and William Wallace, is thought to have come from this area. There are some ancient gravestones in the cemetery, and it remained in use for burials well into the 19th century. The Skelmley Aisle at Largs is practically all that remains of the old parish church. Within it is a magnificent, glorious tomb built in 1636 for Sir Robert Montgomery of Skelmley and his wife, Dame Margaret Douglas. The old kirk was dedicated to St Columba. A new church was built in 1812 nearby. The old aisle was retained. Apart from the magnificent Skelmley monument, it also contains a beautifully painted wooden ceiling. Beneath a stone slab, steps lead down to the crypt below. where lead-lined coffins contained the bodies of Sir Robert and his wife. A church at Loudon was first recorded in 1451. In 1738, it ceased to be a parish. Then the church became the burial isle of the Campbells of Loudon Castle. Also buried here is Lady Flora Hastings, who died of cancer and was involved with the court scandal at the time of Queen Victoria. Janet Little, the Scottish milkmaid poet, is buried here. And finally, Thomas Fleming, who was a martyr in Covenanting days, was buried here in 1679. The Campbell Isle was restored by the Marquess of Bute in 1898. St Cuthbert's Church at Monkton ceased to be used in 1837. It's famous for being the site where Blind Harry says that an exhausted William Wallace had a dream which filled him full of enthusiasm for continuing the fight against Edward I. Reverend Thomas Burns, a nephew of Robert Burns, had a hand in designing the church. For a while it was known as Burns's Folly. Also his daughter Anne is buried here. The old cemetery remained in use until the 19th century, and the kirk itself has the burial isle of the Angus family of Lady Kirk. Overlooking the area is a monument to James McCrae, who made his fortune in India, came back and purchased the Orange Field estate, which is now Prestwick Airport. It's not clear where he was buried, but it's possible he was buried within Monkton Kirk. New Cumnock became a parish in its own right in 1650. And by 1659, a parish church had been built. In 1832, it was abandoned and a new church was built nearby. It stands on the Castle Hill. The castle itself no longer exists, but was held by the Barons of Cumnock. Conservation work has been carried out on the old kirk to consolidate the ruins, surrounded by a substantial cemetery. Very little remains of the old church at St Andrews in North Berwick. First recorded in 1177, become ruinous by 1656, and a new church was built in 1659. Old Daly Parish Church was abandoned when a new church was built a few miles up the road. What was then called New Daly, now simply Daly. It became the burial site of the Cathcarts of Collegiate Castle, and the Dalrymple Hamiltons of Bargany. Also, the poet and artist William Scott Bell of Penkill Castle is buried here. Inside the old kirk are the old blue charter stones. These were equivalent to deeds that gave right of ownership to the lands of the parish. They're also used as lifting stones as trials of strength, but they've been firmly attached to the ground and can't be moved. The old parish kirk of Penningham stands in a remote location a few miles away from Newton Stewart. By 1777, a new church had been built to replace it in Newton Stewart. The churchyard remained in use certainly as late as 1844. A small station was present nearby, with trains only stopping on market days. This was the old line that ran down to Wigtown. The old Perston Kirk in Irvine, North Ayrshire, used to belong to Kewinning Abbey. It was joined with the parish of Dreghorn in 1668. A new church had been built in Dreghorn in 1771. By 1775 it had become ruinous and became the burial site of the Macreadys and the Muirs of the Purston estate. It had been dedicated to the Virgin Mary. Also, a chapel and a well once stood nearby. The 12th century Kirk of St. Nicholas stands on a raised mound overlooking the sea at Prestwick. It was last used in 1779 and the roof was removed. It underwent substantial repairs in 1837. It has a large cemetery surrounding it, and there's an interesting stone mort safe used to prevent body snatchers from taking freshly buried bodies. When it became a Presbyterian church, the old ornate windows were replaced with rectangular ones because it didn't suit the austere tastes of the Presbyterians of the time. Old Sorbie Kirk near Wigtown in Dumfries and Galloway was built in 1750. It became disused when a new church was built in the village in 1875. It's a substantial cemetery, and standing within it is the mausoleum of the Stuarts, the bitter enemies of the Hannay family of nearby Sorbie Tower. A highly unusual feature within the old kirk itself is that one of the gravestones standing next to the wall has had a stone canopy built out over it to shelter it from the worst of the weather conditions. The old Crosby Kirk was associated with the estate of Fullerton. It was built in 1691, though records go back as far as 1229. Tradition has it that it lost its roof and one of the gable ends in a storm on the day when Robert Burns was born at Alloway. An old gravestone in the cemetery is that of David Hamilton, the son of James Hamilton, who was responsible for the assassination using a gun of the Regent Moray at Linlithgow. The first chapel built at Maybole in South Ayrshire was in 1371 by Sir John Kennedy of Dunure. In 1382 he established a Collegiate College, one of only two ever built in Ayrshire, the other being at Comores. It later became, after the Reformation, the burial site of the Kennedys of Culzean, and the sacristy was converted into the burial site of the Kennedys of Cassillis.